Back in the early 90s, before I got married, had kids, or settled down, I had a girlfriend I was crazy about. I thought she was perfect and believed we'd be together forever. But one day, I came home early from work and caught her in bed with a coworker. I immediately grabbed a bag, packed what I couldn't leave behind, and kicked her out. About an hour later, I drove to a motel about 15 miles outside of town. It wasn't the first one I saw, but it was the first that looked safe enough not to worry about my car getting stolen. I pulled in, booked a room for a week, and asked the front desk clerk about the nearest liquor store. That first night, I got blackout drunk, and the next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache so bad I poured the second bottle of vodka down the bathroom sink. Clearly, booze wasn't going to fix anything. After stuffing my face with burgers and cheese at a nearby diner, I went back to my room and passed out. About 3 hours later, I woke up at 9:30 p.m. and took a shower to clear my head. I figured I'd have a quiet night with the TV and maybe order a pizza if the front desk knew a place that delivered this far out. But as I stepped out of the bathroom, I heard screaming from the parking lot outside. After drying off and throwing on some clothes, I peeked through the curtains and saw a woman standing at the far end of the parking lot, yelling at the front desk clerk. From that distance, through the window, I couldn't make out what she was saying. Maybe seeing someone else in distress made me feel a little less sorry for myself. Out of curiosity, I stepped outside onto the hallway, lit a cigarette, and pretended not to watch the drama unfolding. But when I could finally hear what she was saying, it stopped being entertaining. I might sound like a jerk, but who doesn't like watching a little argument between strangers? This woman, maybe late 20s or early 30s, with dark hair, tan skin, wearing jeans, sneakers, and a white t-shirt, was yelling things like, "We have to get everyone out of here, they're all gonna die," in between telling the clerk to shut up and listen. I thought, hold up, what? And took a few steps toward the parking lot to hear better. The clerk was trying to calm her down, saying he'd call the police. But she wasn't having it. She kept saying, "The cops can't do anything. They'll die too. We need to get everyone out of here now." I wasn't the only one hearing this. As the screaming went on, more people came out of their rooms to see what was happening. A couple of kids were with their parents, but they were quickly ushered back inside when they heard her yelling about an impending massacre. She was so convincing that I started wondering, is this woman having a breakdown in the middle of the motel parking lot? Or is this real? Is someone actually coming to kill us? This isn't something to joke about. People on the second floor clearly thought so too, because some went back to their rooms looking worried, and one guy was holding his car keys, obviously ready to bolt if things went south. The woman's scream sounded like she genuinely believed what she was saying. She was terrified, and that fear started spreading to everyone else. People were getting nervous. Kids were crying, and she was getting more and more agitated, yelling at the crowd, "Don't you people get it? We can't stay here." I felt it too. The thought crossed my mind. Damn, what if she's right? Others were thinking the same, not just the guy with the car keys. People started shouting, "Call the cops." But you could tell they weren't just annoyed at her freaking out. They were scared of what she was saying. The front desk clerk turned to the crowd on the second floor balcony, where the "call the cops" shouts were coming from, and said everything was under control. But as soon as he said that, the woman seemed to completely lose it. Maybe because he said things were fine, she started moving toward him. He didn't realize how close she'd gotten until it was too late. He tried to back away, telling her to stay back, but she grabbed his arm. I thought she was going to hit him, but instead, she pulled his arm toward her, leaned down, and bit him hard on the hand, hard enough that I thought I saw blood. The clerk screamed in pain, yelling for her to let go. Shouts and screams echoed through the motel as she bit him. A few more people rushed back to their rooms, not wanting to see what happened next. I'm not sure how the clerk got free, but I think he pulled her hair and shoved her off, because next thing I knew, she was on the ground. While she kept screaming that we were all going to die, someone else came out from the front desk with a gun in hand, saying the police had been called and telling her to leave before she got arrested. The woman went nuts again, screaming that the cops couldn't help, and they'd die too. She started moving toward the person I later learned was the motel manager, but he didn't make the same mistake as the clerk. He backed up, keeping his distance, raised the gun, and told her to stay back. Looking back, that's when I started thinking she wasn't entirely crazy, because when she saw the gun pointed at her, she stopped dead in her tracks. She backed up, then turned and saw a young couple on the second-floor balcony, the mom holding a baby. The crazy woman ran toward the stairs, begging them to give her the baby so at least it would be safe. But she didn't even make it halfway up the stairs before the dad blocked her. He tried to stop her, but when she swung at him, he shoved her hard, and she tumbled down a few steps. It wasn't a bad fall, so she got right back up. But as she tried to climb again, a police car suddenly peeled into the parking lot, grabbing her attention. The cop car gave a short siren blast like a command to stop. The manager put the gun down on the ground and raised his hands. One cop jumped out, drawing his gun, but not pointing it at anyone, while the manager explained the situation. The other cop approached the woman, and it all started again. At first, she seemed relieved, like she thought the cops would help evacuate the motel. But when the officer made it clear that wasn't happening, she started screaming again that everyone was going to die. This time, she went beyond crazy, from like a 5'10" to an 11'10". She was yelling, "Why won't anyone listen to me? Are you all stupid?" She wasn't just screaming, she was shrieking, her voice cracking, her words blending together. That was one of the scariest parts, watching this woman's mind seem to unravel right in front of me. She started moving toward the cop. He backed up, pulling out a bright yellow taser, and though he didn't aim it right away, that move sent her completely over the edge. She lunged at him, maybe to bite him, and he didn't hesitate. He aimed the taser, fired, and her body froze mid-step before she face-planted onto the ground. It was an awful fall. As the cops went to cuff her, she seemed to be unconscious. Not long after, an ambulance arrived, bandaged her face, and put her on a stretcher, probably taking her to a hospital, with the cops following behind. The manager walked around the parking lot, begging people not to check out, assuring everyone things were fine now. I went back to my room, grabbed my keys, and headed back to the burger joint for some fries and a milkshake. Nobody came to the motel and massacred anyone, and by then I knew it wasn't going to happen. That poor woman most likely just lost her mind and believed something terrible was coming. But the terrible thing, in the end, only happened to her. Back when I was still in college, I used to drive home for the holidays. And since my parents lived all the way across the country, the journey took a day and a half and included an overnight stop in a motel. It was one of those single-story, L-shaped places that looked like it had been around since the 50s or something, where the rooms opened directly onto the parking lot. The paint was fading. It had 2 buzzing neon signs out front that you could hear at night. And since the place was clean and cheap and was mostly exactly a 10-hour drive from college, I figured it was as good a place as any to get some needed sleep. Now, during my sophomore year, I pulled in and paid cash for a room, and then parked right in front of my door. I dumped my overnight bag inside, checked the room over to make sure everything was as it should be, and then walked back outside to my car. But as I was locking my door, someone came up to the room next to mine. It was a woman, maybe in her mid-30s, and since she was looking down at her phone as she walked past, she slammed into me as she did so. I was about to mumble sorry out of reflex, but she beat me to speaking, not to offer an apology of her own, but to call me a dumb effing B-word who should watch where she's standing. It was so insane that I was stunned, and I didn't let it bother me. And as Zor walked to my car, I kind of laughed to myself at how comically terrible some people can be. I also remember being super relieved that I was only staying one night, and that I most likely wouldn't have to interact with her again. I had no idea that me and little Miss RDE were in for a much more significant encounter. I drove down to the same fried chicken place that I stopped by during my freshman year and was relieved to find that it was still open. I got myself a sandwich, some fries, and an iced tea. And then after back out into the parking lot, I spotted a man standing by what I assumed was his car. It looked like he was watching the people inside through the big panel windows. The second he saw me, he called out in a friendly voice asking if I could help him. Then, when I asked what was going on, he told me his story. So, about a week prior, his wife's parents had died in a freak car accident. She was absolutely devastated, but as the days went by, she got worse and worse, until one day when she seemed to have a complete nervous breakdown and drove off in her car after saying she was going to find her dead parents, like she didn't really believe they were gone, given what a fragile state of mind his wife was in. The man said he was desperate to find her before she got herself hurt or into trouble. He then reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone to show me a picture of her, and when he turned the screen around so I could see, I recognized who it was. It was little Miss RDE, the lady who barged into me outside my motel room maybe only 45 minutes prior. I took a long look at the picture, staying quiet while I studied it. And then after looking up to meet the man's eyes, I told him, "Nope, sorry, haven't seen her, but if you give me your cell number, I can call you if I do." And I tried to sound as genuine as possible. Took down his cell number before wishing him luck, and then walked back to our cars as he thanked me for my kindness. Now, a lot of you are going to ask, why the hell did you just lie to that nice man? Searching for his wife. And I get it. I'd be asking the same thing if it was me reading this right now. But right as I was on the cusp of telling the guy, "Good news, I know where she is, she's in the hotel room right next to mine," I heard my friend Allie's voice in my head. Allie, who'd been one of my best friends all throughout high school, had suffered through a horrible dating experience back when she was a senior. She ended up dating an older guy, not by much, just a couple of years. But while this guy seemed cool and had a nice car and had money to spend on her, he turned out to be an absolute psycho who could not take no for an answer. She had to quit her job and find one someplace else because he kept showing up, trying to either yell at her or beg her to take him back. But just a few months into working at the new place, he showed up there too. And this time, he didn't want to talk. He tried dragging her into his car. The cops recalled it was a whole thing. But then afterwards, when one of her old middle school friends heard about it, she called her in tears, saying the whole thing was her fault. The ex-boyfriend had reached out to her, told her a bunch of lies about organizing a surprise party, and then managed to trick her into spilling the beans regarding Allie's new place of work. It was cruel, devious, and manipulative, illustrating exactly why she'd had to break up with him in the first place. So when that guy showed me a picture of his wife, after telling me a bunch of stuff I had no way to verify, I figured that I'd better play it safe. It wasn't just Allie's experience that made me lie to him either. There was something about the way he told his story that just didn't sit right with me. It sounded almost rehearsed. And while I'd obviously help the guy out if his story turned out to be true, it's always better to be safe than sorry. When I got back to the motel, I went straight to the door of the room next to mine and then hesitated a few moments before finally knocking. I saw the curtains twitch to the right of me and then suddenly heard little Miss RDE yell, "What do you want?" She didn't sound mad or crazy, just a little annoyed that I'd knocked on her door. Sure, but nothing like the nervous breakdown her husband had described. When I told her I had something to ask her, and it was better to ask face to face, she came to the door and opened it just a crack before peering out at me from the dark inside. She then asked me again in a much lower voice what business I had knocking at her door. Now, I didn't quite know what to say at first, or rather, I didn't quite know how to say it. So instead, I just asked her a question in the form of, "Ma'am, did your parents pass recently?" Now she just screwed up her face before telling me no. Her father had died many years before, and her mother was still very much alive. It feels tasteless to say this given the circumstances, but that vindication, that confirmation that I was right to withhold information, it felt great. I hadn't been paranoid and my suspicions had been entirely correct, and the lady still had a confused look on her face. So I quickly told her about the man that I met in the parking lot of that chicken place and how he'd showed me a photograph of her. And the second I said it, her face just dropped and turned white. But not just in shock or realization. She looked more like I told her the dead were rising from their graves. She looked terrified, and after a few moments of silence, she told me, "Can you come inside?" And after she shut the door behind us, the first thing she did was thank me. And I witnessed a total shift in this woman's demeanor. She went from rude and antisocial to sweet and vulnerable, as she explained that she'd recently escaped from her abusive husband. It wasn't just arguments or bad tempers, but years of steadily escalating violence. Then, by the time she got scared he might beat her to death, she knew it was time to go. And she slipped away while he was at work, with nothing but a case of clothes, some cash, and her car. Hearing about all the abuse she went through made my skin crawl, and when I told her I'd lied to him about not seeing her, she looked so relieved that I thought she might cry. I also told her about taking his cell number and joked about how I could misdirect him with a false sighting. Now, this was the first time I actually saw her smile, and she laughed weakly before warning me not to get involved. Then, after thanking me a dozen more times, I went back to my room and got ready for bed. I went to sleep feeling good, like I'd done something truly special in helping a battered spouse avoid her abusive husband. But a couple of hours later, I hear this crash that had me bolting out of bed, terrified. And because in that moment, I had major sleepy brain, I initially thought that what I'd heard was a car accident on the highway outside. But I didn't even make it over to the window before I heard another bang, and it was coming from the room next door, the one with little Miss RDE, or as she should really be called, the wife on the run. I dialed 911 on speaker as I threw on some clothes, telling them what was going on before heading out the door into the parking lot. I hadn't seen the husband yet, but I didn't need to. I knew only one man in the world could be responsible for the things she'd screamed, and the only one who would have replied in the way he did. Once I was dressed, I ran out into the parking lot just in time to see the same man from the chicken place parking lot. He had her by the arm, and he was dragging his escaped wife towards a pickup truck. He was dragging her, but she wasn't on her feet. She was unconscious, her legs scraping against the gravel, and the sight of her rag doll like that made me feel sick. I started yelling and screaming for him to let her go, for people to help her. And before long, a couple of other motel guests came out of their rooms. One of them, a big guy in flannel pajama pants, ran straight toward them and shouted for him to let go. Another man from further down the road joined in. The husband swung at one of them, but in the chaos, a third man came at him from the side and shoved him so hard he let go of his wife. After that, he seemed to realize just how outnumbered he was, and after running to his truck, he peeled out of that lot and zoomed off down the highway. Someone had already called the police, and another guest was on the phone with 911 for an ambulance, and the woman just laid on the floor, still out cold with her face all swollen on one side. I started wondering how her husband could have found her, and when it hit me, the realization made me feel twice as nauseous. He must have seen that I recognized her when he showed me that photo of her, or maybe he just smelled the lie for what it was. Then all he had to do was follow me back to the motel at a distance, and then he could have watched from afar as I knocked on that door of her room. I made it easy for him. I thought that I'd been helping her, and instead, I'd condemned her to face a nightmare come to life. The cops arrived to secure the area, and then not long after, the EMT showed up and wheeled her away on a stretcher. She was awake by then, but she obviously wasn't doing too well, and I couldn't bring myself to try and talk to her because of how guilty I felt. I was convinced that I'd led her abusive husband straight to her, and I'm still convinced that that's the case, even after years upon years of trying to convince myself otherwise. After the cops and EMTs drove off, the whole lot went completely quiet again, and I went back to bed and tried to sleep, but it didn't come easy. In the morning, I packed my bag and checked out, barely making eye contact with the manager as I did so. I didn't ask about the woman, and I couldn't bring myself to. I just sort of got in my car and drove off. For under 5 years, I used to work the front desk at a little motel in the middle of nowhere. It was a quiet little place, a little run down, but Rhonda, our cleaner, kept the place sparkling. We used to get hunters in the fall, fishermen men in the summer, and the occasional trucker rolling in during the midnight hours. As much as it was mostly a boring job, I came to appreciate the safety and stability. But every so often, we got some real bad men rolling into that old parking lot of ours. And one of them came in the spring of 1996. It was late on a Sunday evening when his car turned into the lot. It had been a quiet day, maybe 4 or 5 check-ins, and I was halfway through a bad cup of coffee when he walked up to the front desk. He looked normal, a regular middle-aged white guy with a big coat and a red woolly hat. He was friendly too, and greeted me warmly before saying he wanted a room for the night. I checked which rooms were free, told him the rate, and then after he slid a credit card across the counter, I ran it through, but the machine declined it. And he says, "Huh, that's weird. It's been working fine all day." And then asked me to try the card again. I did, not once, but twice, and both times the card was declined. The guy seemed really embarrassed. He pulled out his wallet as he apologized a bunch, and I told him it was fine as he handed me the cash. Those things happen from time to time, and he didn't have anything to apologize for. He gave me this big smile as he thanked me, and then after I handed him his key and directed him to room 6, he thanked me and headed off down the hall. I was working the night shift that night, 9:00 p.m. to 7:00 a.m. So, aside from watching the place and making sure the vending machine was all stocked up, all I did was watch movies on the little box TV that we kept in the office. I could keep an eye on the parking lot, so if guests rolled in, I could see them coming. But that night, when I saw headlights coming into the lot, I looked up to see not just one, but 2 cruisers from the Mason County Sheriff's Department. 2 deputies stayed outside watching all the rooms. But one deputy came inside to ask me about a declined credit card a few hours earlier. He knew it had been declined 3 times and he needed to speak to the person using it. When I mentioned the guy in the red hat, the deputy asked which room he was in, and I led him to the room. The door was locked, but I gave them the spare key. They opened it slowly and their guns were drawn, but the room was empty. The man in the red hat was gone. One of the deputies said that he must have been watching the parking lot, and when he saw the patrol cars drive by, he slipped out through his room's rear window. He left behind nothing but a half-empty bottle of water on the nightstand, a pair of muddy boots by the bed, and the faint smell of something that I couldn't place right away, almost like hair dye or some type of chemical. The deputies asked me to stay out of the room until another group of cops had searched the place and taken away evidence. But then a few hours later, I was taking out some trash when I overheard two of the deputies talking to each other. And what I heard made my skin crawl. They said the forensics guy had found a bag in that room, and that inside were a whole bunch of different wigs. The forensics team said that they'd need to test it to confirm it, but that at first glance it looked and felt a hell of a lot like real human hair. But it wasn't that which got me. It was hearing one of the deputies say how one of the wigs matched the hair of a missing woman who disappeared only a week or so earlier. And I decided that I didn't want to hear anymore. The deputies and forensics folks stayed for a couple of hours. They took the wigs and the boots and even the water bottle. I heard one of them say that they were going to check it for DNA. And when they left, the motel went quiet again. But it felt like anything but peaceful. Just hours before, someone who may or may not have been a psychopath, trophy-seeking murderer had been standing 3 feet from me. I'd handed him a key, smiled at him, and I even told him to have a good night. And all the while, maybe in that bag that he was carrying, there was some missing woman's hair. That thought will stay with me as long as I live. And you should have seen how calm he was, too. You'd never have suspected in a million years that he was capable of something like that. No visible nerves, no rush, just sort of still like he had all the time in the world. And I didn't hear much beyond that. The sheriff came back a few days later to ask me some more questions, but they hadn't caught the guy, and he couldn't say if the hair really did belong to that missing woman. But I could tell by the way he talked that it was probably bad. After that, every time someone walked through that door to check in, I watched them a little differently. I still think about that man a whole lot, actually, because I know people like him don't just exist in movies or the news now. They walk through the front door with a big old smile on their face, pretending they're someone they're not, and you've got no way of knowing who they really are until it's too late.